2024, an election year like no other. From the candidates to the issues, from voter integrity and analysis, we'll discuss debates, trends, patterns, election laws, and more. This is Vote 2024, Path to the Polls.
Donald Trump laying out an agenda for his second term in the White House. And with the first female chief of staff in history by his side, a lot of people wonder if Susie Wiles will have a profound impact on the tenor of a second Trump term. We'll flesh that out more in a bit. The president-elect promises the largest deportation of immigrants in American history, sweeping new tariffs on imports, and freezing climate-related regulations. Also on the docket, remaking federal health agencies and making ideological changes to the education system. Mr. Trump will get his chance to do those things and promises to keep his promises. Trump says we're going to fix everything about our country. Fact is, many of his proposals are complicated, and he has yet to lay out any specifics. On immigration, Trump has called for the use of the National Guard and empowering domestic police forces. Build the Wall for 2016 has become creating the largest mass deportation program in history. And Trump said, I'll stop the invasion of criminals into our country and I'll bring back the American dream. But he stopped short of saying how. Few details were released. We've got no idea how the plan's going to look, how he'd ensure it targeted only people in the U.S. illegally would be targeted. Trump's tax policies largely favor corporations and the wealthy. He basically promised to extend the 2017 tax overhaul. Few notable changes that include lowering the corporate income tax rate to 15% from the current rate of 21%. We also know he's rolling or calling to roll back society's emphasis on legal protections for LGBTQ plus citizens and transgender rights, and also promising to end boys and girls sports. These stories and more are coming up on Path to the Polls. Appreciate you joining us. And joining me is News4Jax political analyst and the head of the Jacksonville University Public Policy Institute, Rick Mullaney, who is always a pleasure to have here on the show. So let's talk about Susie Wiles. It's somebody that you have known for the, oh gosh, I guess past 30 years. Ties to Jacksonville, instrumental with former Jacksonville mayor and Flagler College president John Delaney. She is somebody who, works with MAGA, establishment Republicans, Democrats, and even the media. You think she's somebody who can help navigate Mr. Trump in a way that we've never seen before?
Well, good morning, Bruce. It's great to be with you, and that's a lot.
It is a lot to, I kind of, got ahead of myself here.
No, it's good. Let me talk about Susie Wiles for a second. I've known her for over 30 years. We worked together for 10 years. For 5 years, we were in the Delaney administration together. For 5 years, we were with the Payton administration together. And also, by the way, at Jacksonville University, she's an adjunct professor on political campaigns and a very popular professor. By the way, don't take that aversion to being on camera and staying in the background to mean someone who can't present well. She's very articulate. And by the way, I think a lot of people have highlighted, understandably, her success as a campaign manager. Rick Scott's campaign, Ron DeSantis' campaign, for Donald Trump 3 times in 2016 in Florida, in 2020 in Florida, and in 2024, of course, this year. But beyond just the political campaign, Susie has a track record and a history of getting results on policy initiatives. As you saw with John Delaney, you mentioned him earlier. When she was chief of staff for John Delaney and part of that administration, we worked together. And she helped deliver on several big policy initiatives and helped shape the agenda. One of them, for example, was the Preservation Project. That was the largest local government land acquisition program in the history of Florida, one of the largest in the country. Susie actually came up with the Preservation Project name, played a major leadership role in delivering that initiative. She did the same for John Delaney on the Better Jacksonville plan. She did it for John Payton on Jacksonville Journey. That's a long way of saying this. As chief of staff for President Trump, she'll be the gatekeeper, of course, and in the campaign, she kept them on track. But I wouldn't underestimate Susie's influence on policy in helping to shape the agenda. She will shape it will be Trump's agenda, but Susie will help her accomplish it. So that's a long way of saying, in answer to your question, I do think she will play a role in shaping it. She'll play a role in helping get things done. And I think people should take comfort in the fact that Susie is smart. She's practical. In my experience with Susie, she's not an ideologue. She's not extreme right, not extreme left. She's really sort of a right-center conservative. And so I think she will bring a very calming, stabilizing influence in a world that's very, very challenging as chief of staff.
Now, basically, she had some conditions for accepting the job. Sources said that she wanted to control access to Trump, presumably to prevent unofficial advisors from having undue influence on him. Can she be successful?
Really hard. Take a look at Trump's first term. He had 4 chiefs of staff. So for Susie Wiles, this will be challenging, the shelf life of a chief of staff. For any presidential term is short. For Donald Trump, the first time there were 4 of them. But the quote attributed to her is she wants to stop the clown cars from coming into the White House. And part of what she's referring to there, of course, is that there are tremendous demands on the president, tremendous demands on his time, and she will be the gatekeeper, helping to set who's spending that time with him. And she wants to be able to move his agenda forward, to keep him on message, and so that'll be a big part of her job. And you can see why she would want that as chief of staff, being able to have some control there. Like I said, she'll be quiet, I believe effective. She'll help shape things in the background, but part of that is being a successful gatekeeper, which is hard to do.
It's all predicated on the fact Donald Trump has to listen to her.
That's number one, Bruce. I was going to say that. I'm former chief of staff myself with John Delaney, and even at the local level, if you try to be the gatekeeper, if the top guy, whether it's the mayor, the governor, the president, wants to see somebody, they will. And that will happen with Donald Trump, too. But behind the scenes, she will be quietly shaping what the administration looks like, and I think she brings some calm and some stability to a very chaotic circumstance. It's hard. It's going to be really hard.
And she's also her very own person. I mean, if you look at the Ron DeSantis campaign, she had no trouble, stepping away, and when she was done, she was done.
Yes, she has. By the way, she has come in at the last minute. She's come in the beginning. She did that with Rick Scott when he was unknown when she took over his campaign and ran it here in Florida. Ron DeSantis, if you may remember, was in a very difficult circumstance. He had won the primary when Susie came in, and then she did move on, just like you're saying. But in 2016, she did it in Florida for Trump. And I will say this: I remember in 2015 when she told me she was flying up to meet with Donald Trump, and she met for him, but the first time at Trump Tower. When she came back, she said the media portrayals of him, he's nothing like that he was a gentleman. And she also told me in the fall of 2015 he was going to be the next president of the United States. So she has a 9-year history with Donald Trump. They've developed trust, and I think has been widely applauded on this choice. Of course, first female in the history of the country to serve as chief of staff. She has a daunting job in front of her, very, very difficult. But I do think she brings a very positive influence in terms of how she's going to try to manage that gatekeeping role and the role as chief of staff.
And there was one point in the campaign where she kind of walked away from him. Things weren't going very well here in Florida, and then he brought her back.
You're talking about with Donald Trump?
Yes.
Absolutely so. There certainly was a falling out with Governor DeSantis, various accounts as to why that happened. There was one instance in which, and this happens with Donald Trump, in which he was displeased over something and handled it in a certain way. They resolved that. They resolved that. They've moved forward since, and they've just gone through a very difficult but very successful campaign. Susie rightfully has received lots of credit for helping to manage that campaign. She lets Donald Trump be Donald Trump. She doesn't try to dominate center stage. But I think you're going to help. You've been talking about, I think she'll help shape his agenda. And what Susie has done in the past is Susie delivers results.
Right.
And you'll see if she delivers results here. I think she's in good position to help deliver results.
And when I said she doesn't want to be, in the foreground, that's what I meant when she likes to be in the background. She doesn't like being center stage. Yeah, I think it was, Mark Cuban said on The View, Donald Trump doesn't like strong women. Then the Republicans bring her out, and she is strong, she is intelligent, she is strategic, and she's even affable.
She's all of that. She really is. And so I think that comment was way off base, and Susie's a good example of why it was.
All right, let's talk about that agenda. Trump says that he made promises. We'll keep his promises. He says, we're going to fix everything about our country. So let's start with immigration. He called for the largest deportation of immigrants in American history, the use of the National Guard, and empowering domestic police forces. Build the Wall from 2016 has become creating the largest mass deportation program in history. Trump said, I will stop the invasion of criminals into our country. I'll bring back the American dream. Stop short of saying how. So we know he brought Homan back to help him realize that dream. As a result, people wonder how he'd ensure it targeted only people in the U.S. illegally. That's quite a task.
It's a big task, but Bruce, I think this is going to be in many ways job one. This is going to be one of the things that he starts on his first day. And part of what he's going to do, he'll work in several areas. One, there's going to be a change in policy. By policy, the 93 executive orders that J.D. Vance mentioned in the debate that were repealed by Joe Biden, you can expect many of those executive orders to go back into place.
On day one.
right from the very beginning. And you can expect Stay in Mexico to go back in place, and they'll work with Mexico on that. And Stay in Mexico, what we're talking about is for those who are seeking asylum, instead of being in this country, they'll be in Mexico when they're seeking asylum. I expect him to go forward with building the wall. So I expect some policy shifts. I expect additional resources because he has a majority in the Senate and looks like a majority in the House. But on the deportation side, some people interpret the greatest mass deportation in history to mean all illegal immigrants are going to be deported. That's not what this means. I think it's going to be far more measured, but it will be significant. From everything I can tell, they're going to start with a deportation effort, but the first group will be those who have criminal convictions or those who've been arrested, those who are here and have that criminal offenses. The second will be those in which the court has entered an order of deportation, but it hasn't happened yet, and that's a pretty significant number. And the third category is most likely to be those who've come into the country illegally during the last year or two. If you add those three categories together, that could very well be a very significant, maybe largest mass deportation in history of the country. I think where people get really concerned is what about those people who've been here for 10 years or who came over as children years ago.
And the birthright.
Well, birthright is a constitutional right. If you're born in this country, the 14th Amendment's going to say you are a citizen if you're born.
Donald Trump said that that's not going to matter.
Yeah,
but again, is that just Trump speak?
He can say it, but he's going to be on the losing side of that legal argument. But there's a different argument, and a more equitable argument for those people who've been here living here lawfully for 10 years who are employed. I don't think they're the target of this. I really don't. For those children that are born here, you're talking about birthright citizenship. It's in the 14th Amendment. You're going to have a constitutional amendment to change that. They are American citizens when they're born here. So I do think the whole specter of mass deportation conjures up the rounding up of everybody in the country for this effort. I don't expect it to be that way. I do expect it to be significant. I do expect it to start early. And it'll start with those who've been convicted of crimes or been arrested. It'll also include those who have orders of deportation. I expect it to be more measured. But I also expect a policy shift. Stay in Mexico, build the wall, institution of these executive orders. It will represent a shift in policy.
Okay, and that's interesting because, okay, what I'm really hearing here is that there's rhetoric, there's things that can't be taken literally, and if you talk to a lot of people, that through the years there has been no real policy, and that is the problem.
Bruce, I think you're highlighting something I'm going to put under. There's there's campaigning, and then there's governing. Mm-hmm. And in the campaigning, you'll say lots of things, but when you get to govern, it may be more nuanced. Mm-hmm. In the campaign, this idea of the largest mass deportation in history may have conjured up an image of rounding up everybody. It's more nuanced than that, but it is going to be a very strong effort to secure the border. And with the majority in the House and Senate, he's going to be able to get the legislative resources he wants and the changes that he wants. But you're correct. That rhetorical piece of it is one thing. The implementation is another. But you can already see with the appointments he's made as border czar that he is taking it seriously. And this is a campaign promise that I think he wants to fulfill with some strong actions on the border. By the way, it was at the heart of his campaign in 2016. It was a big part of the campaign in 2024.
And dare I say, there's the media interpretation, the misinformation, and the social media misinformation, which just doesn't help the whole thing.
It does not. This is more nuanced, difficult issue. You can certainly see if you've been in this country for 10 years and have been working lawfully, or you're really concerned about what this may mean. We'll have to wait and see. What the example today from the Wall Street Journal, what about grandma who's here illegally and who's been here a while? Donald Trump has said when his interview with them, he's not worried about grandma. Right. And he's not worried about those people that have been here productively for many, many years. But the other piece of this he does want to address, and I think the election itself was built in part on that, and he wants to deliver on that promise.
All right, for those of you who argue that, this show has been one-sided, there you go. We just take things factually and we try and paint an accurate picture of what's going on, unlike what many of you believe, unlike what some of the other media portray things. We just want to give you an idea of what reality is about. All right, Trump's tax policies. They largely favor corporations. They largely favor the wealthy, basically promise to extend the 2017 tax overhaul. There are a few notable changes that include lowering the corporate income tax rate to 15% from the current rate of 21%. If you look at who put him in office, it's people angry about the economy. Those economic moves won't do much to help them. People are angry about prices at the checkout counter at the grocery store. They're angry about the prices, when they go shopping for Christmas presents. And ultimately, the President of the United States doesn't have much to do with that.
It's a big challenge, but let's talk about tax policy for a second. One thing heading into the election that was going to be big for the viewers and for the whole country, would the 2017 tax cuts expire? Because next year, in 2025, the 2017 tax cuts do expire. And by the way, those tax cuts were across the board. The biggest percentage cuts, which are the middle class, those people making between $50,000 and $150,000. Smaller percentages for the wealthy, but because they're wealthy, it meant more money to them. But next year, that expires. Now that the president has a majority in the Senate, 53-47, appears to have a majority in the House, although it's very thin, I think it's a pretty good bet that you're going to see the extension of those tax cuts from 2017. Those tax cuts will be extended. On the rest of the tax policy, we're going to have to wait and see. On the campaign trail, Donald Trump proposed many tax cuts that, quite frankly, need to be vetted in terms of their impact. Tax cuts for Social Security. We're not going to tax Social Security payments. Tax on tips. We're not going to tax tips. Overtime. SALT, which is state and local taxes, which they care about a lot in New York and in other places. And deductibility of car payments, for example. That was aimed at Michigan. So how much of those are going to make it? Don't know for sure. But your point is well, and the corporate income tax, it was 35%. He brought it down to 21%. Kamala Harris wanted it at 28%. At some point, you find the right level of taxation, which brings in the revenue needed for the country, and also the right amount that doesn't hinder growth and helps you grow economically. I'm not so sure you get that cut to 15%, but there's broad-ranging pieces on this tax piece. But remember, that tax piece needs to be combined with fiscal policy, and so we're going to have to wait and see what the spending looks like, because your point's really well taken. Some of those proposals could make the deficit gap worse, the debt worse, and that could very much be inflationary, especially if it's combined on the tariff side. You have to see what that looks like. So we'll have to wait and see.
I don't care if you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat, if you're a Libertarian, if you're an independent. You always promise to cut taxes. That's campaign speak. If you look at history, it's always campaign speak.
Well, usually you want to make sure that to the group you're talking to, you're going to cut their taxes. Nobody minds tax increase on somebody else. So if you're going to do it on let's go tax the billionaires, it's okay, I don't know any. But a tax on you, that's a little different.
Exactly. We also know he's calling to roll back society's emphasis on legal protections for LGBTQ plus citizens, transgender rights, also promising to end boys and girls sports. Trump's claiming the practice is widespread. This is going to be a source of great societal friction.
Bruce, I actually think this was, in some ways, maybe a bit of a sleeper issue in this campaign. There were some ads run by the Trump campaign towards the end that they thought were very effective when they talked about this issue with men and women's sports or boys and girls sports. And they said that Kamala Harris was for they, them, and we're for you. That ad was not responded to by the Harris campaign. Many believe it was pretty effective. There's sort of this national consensus developing that this notion of men and women's sports, or the boys and girls sports, that there really is a consensus against it. And look here locally, for example, Nancy Hogshead, outstanding lawyer, professor, progressive, gold medal winner,
Olympic
winner, who has been vocal in saying that men shouldn't be in women's sports, and she's been on the receiving end and lots of criticism on that one issue. I think her position actually reflects a growing national view, quite frankly. And there's been a rejection of that notion. And so this issue, when it comes to men and women's sports, boys and girls sports, I think a consensus is developing. The other piece is for minors, the role of parents, and a primary role for parents. I think those are going to be two areas of focus in this area. It's in terms of how many in the population, it's small, but in terms of the impact politically, it can sometimes be larger. And I think the Trump campaign used this issue pretty strategically in some key states in trying to win the last election.
And you can't necessarily lump it in with LGBTQ plus rights.
That's correct.
And that's another problem.
I would draw a distinction that's separate, what their real focus was, what you just talked about, was boys and girls sports. That's the one they hammered away at because there is that national consensus emerging there.
Right, and that's another problem. You know, you take one issue and you create this big chasm based upon separate issues, and society doesn't get that as well because people don't read, they don't understand, and they see things as black and white, and they're not. The administration downplaying the abortion issue as a second-term priority. I've got to tell you, a lot of people are surprised at what happened with both Amendment 3 and Amendment 4. It was very close. In any other state, I think abortion passed in 7 of the 10 states.
Yes.
It was that 60% threshold that made a difference here in Florida. What happened is interesting because Donald Trump's taking credit for the Supreme Court ending a woman's federal right to terminate a pregnancy and returning abortion regulation to state governments. It remains unclear if he's going to defend legal challenges to restricting access to abortion pills, including mifepristone, as the Biden administration did. Does this become a political hot potato for him?
Bruce, I don't think it's going to be, and I'll tell you what, I was pretty surprised at what happened in this election. In 2022, right after the Dobbs decision, the Dobbs decision was the Supreme Court case in the summer of 2022 in which the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and basically said that there was no federal right to an abortion. That red wave that did not materialize in 2022, I attribute in part to the abortion issue, very potent political issue. Fast forward to 2024. What you saw was, we talk about ticket splitting, where sometimes you vote for a Republican or Democrat at the top of the ticket and someone else down ticket. Interesting thing we saw in 2024 was what I may call policy splitting, where you would vote on the abortion issue one way and a different candidate another way. For example, in Florida, on the abortion issue, Amendment 4, it actually had double-digit passage, but as you just mentioned, it didn't meet the 60% threshold, but 56% to 44% were in favor. Rick Scott, on the other hand, had a double-digit win as the Republican, and he was one who was very much pro-life. You saw that repeat itself around the country, where on the ballot, whether it was minimum wage or whether it was abortion rights, you saw majorities in other states passing it, but you also saw Donald Trump winning and Republicans doing well. So as you look to your crystal ball for Donald Trump for the next 4 years, a couple things to expect. Number one, I do not expect that there will be a federal ban on abortion. That won't happen for a couple reasons. Number one, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have said they're not going to do that. But number two, even if they wanted to, there's the filibuster, and the Republicans lead 53 to 47, but it would take 60 votes in the Senate to get that done. That's not going to happen. So don't expect a ban. Second, on the abortion pill, I don't think you're going to see opposition. I think you're going to see support from Donald Trump. He wants this issue, I think, to politically go away. And the way for it to go away is to leave it where it is, let the states hash this out. In Florida, we're more restrictive at 6 weeks. In Minnesota and in California, they're more liberal on that issue. But this has become a state's issue post-Dobbs, and I think politically that's where Donald Trump wants it to stay.
So Florida has one of the strictest abortion bans in the country. Initially, Ron DeSantis supported a 15-week ban. Do you think that the state revisits that ban? No. Not in the future, maybe, but you still have a very strong Republican majority in the legislature, so I think it's unlikely. We did have a statute that was passed that was 15 weeks, and then subsequently we amended that statute. We put in a new statute to go to 6 weeks. This could change. Maybe it'll be revisited, but I wouldn't expect that in the near term. Could that happen in the longer term? It could happen in the long term. Yeah, nobody has a crystal ball. During his first 4 years in office, Trump made major policy changes, but often complained that bureaucracy got in the way. It'll be interesting to see if the president-elect's staff, which he is in the process of assembling, is better equipped to handle things with lessons learned from the first term, and maybe they'll better navigate those bureaucratic hurdles. And of course, if he has the Senate on his side and the House on his side, it has yet to be determined, but it looks like he may, that will help him.
Bruce, I think he's in a historically strong position. He won a very significant victory with an electoral landslide of 312 electoral votes. He won the popular vote, the first Republican to do that in 20 years. He's got a majority in the Senate. It appears he has going to get a small majority in the House. There's a majority of conservatives in the U.S. Supreme Court, and he knows the federal bureaucracy better than he did in 2016 and knows how to navigate it. For the next couple years, Donald Trump should be able to move forward with his agenda in a very aggressive way, and I think you're going to see him do that on many, many fronts. And although the bureaucracy is challenging to navigate, I think they are better prepared and better equipped to do it. And already you've seen some changes from 2016. Much quicker with this transition team and their appointments, a different type of appointments, clearly stressing loyalty as one of the big factors, but attracting some very talented people. So in response to this question, I do think that federal bureaucracy can often stand in the way, but for Donald Trump, he's at a historic juncture in which for the next couple years, he has a real opportunity to move forward an agenda and to get it through Congress and to move forward.
Yeah, if I remember right, come January 20th during his first term, he had something like 4,000 appointments that weren't filled, and it took a long time. He also didn't meet with the outgoing president at that time, and this time he's going to meet with President Biden to help smooth the transition. So, there are a lot of dynamics that are different.
I think Trump will always be Trump, but I do think the dynamics are different, and you can already see the difference. I mean, they are more experienced. He has one term under his belt. He's bringing in some stabilizing influences, like I mentioned, Susie Wiles, who's very practical and very smart. So I do think it'll be different. And navigating that bureaucracy can be challenging, but they went through it one time, and I think they'll be much more successful this time.
So you're saying that maybe Donald Trump has learned some lessons?
I think they have learned some lessons. We'll have to see what that looks like.
He's got Susie Wiles, but he's also got Stephen Miller, so I'll leave it at that. When Path to the Polls continues, the changing complexion of the balance of power on Capitol Hill and control of the House and Senate. Will Trump have carte blanche when it comes to his legislative agenda? Will the Democrats have any oversight? We'll tackle that when Path to the Polls comes back. Welcome back to Path to the Polls. Bruce Hamilton, along with News 4 Jack's political analyst and head of the Jacksonville University Public Policy Institute, Rick Mullaney. So Rick, some of the biggest items on the Trump agenda will take congressional approval. Of course, if the GOP has both the House and Senate, it'll be less of an issue, and Trump would have complete control of Washington. If the Democrats wrestle control of the House from Speaker Mike Johnson, they may have some more oversight.
It's pretty significant how it turns out in the House, and at this juncture, it looks like Republicans are going to have a thin margin in the House, and that's a pretty big deal. It really is. But tax policy, fiscal policy, spending policy out of the House, oversight from the House. As I mentioned just before the break, Donald Trump really is somewhat of a historic position with a very conservative U.S. Supreme Court, with a majority in the Senate, a likely majority in the House. He has a term of experience behind him, and he's bringing in some new people. So I do think that while the Republican Party historically has been very fractured, we've certainly watched that over the last couple years play out, and the ouster of the Speaker, first time in history with Kevin McCarthy. I actually think the Trump team will do a better job of keeping them in line for several reasons. I think they're going to be able to be somewhat unified. Historically, the Democrats have done a much better job. Certainly Nancy Pelosi was really good at having a unified party to accomplish their agenda, their policy agenda. And Hakeem Jeffries has been really good about keeping a unified Democratic Party. Republicans, not so much. And we've seen the turmoil with the Speaker of the House. We've seen the turmoil on tax and spend issues. But that was all pre-election night. Post Donald Trump's victory and heading into the next term, I suspect that he's going to be able to unify them on the votes that matter to him. And so for him, until the midterms, and typically at the next midterms, you'd expect him to lose both in the Senate and the House. That's typical of what happens historically. But in the near term, he's got an opportunity to really push forward his agenda.
The Democrats don't know what hit them. I mean, they've got a concussion. They're trying to figure out what happened election night. You know, they're like, oh, the polls told us one thing. And if you look at the electoral map, I mean, it's a sea of red. They're like, what happened? And they worry about what they characterize, their terms, Trump's crazy chaos careening from one thing to another, 1 minute firing staffers by tweet, which is what he did before, the next minute trying to buy Greenland. So for the Democrats, whether in the majority or minority, they need to be unified, and I'm not sure they are right now.
Well, right now, whenever you suffer a loss, this happens on the Republican side, it happens on the Democratic side. A lot of soul searching for the Republicans when they lost to Barack Obama twice, and they began to do, we need a new playbook. Are we ever going to win again? In this last election, they talked about the tremendous shift in the Latino vote and Hispanics, and if that trend continues, oh, are we ever going to win again? The answer is yes, they are. They will win again, and so will the Republicans. But a lot of soul searching goes on post those losses. But as you look at the policy agenda moving forward, and you look at the Trump agenda, if the Democrats want to have influence, clearly they're going to have to accomplish what you just said. They're going to have to speak with one voice. They're going to have to be unified. And I think part of their challenge is a little bit of a recognition that there's been an outsized voice, quite frankly, from the far left progressive side, and that those centrists and more moderates have really been drowned out. But given the results of last week, there's a lot of soul searching going on in that issue. And I do think they're going to speak with a more unified voice if they're going to have any influence in the near term, because it does appear you have Republican majorities in both the House and the Senate. That bodes well for Donald Trump.
Oh, it does. And some of the votes you can explain. The blackmail vote was basically, look, the Democrats economically have not done anything for us over the years, and that's why we're going for Donald Trump. The Latino vote, I'm not sure they've figured out how they can explain it yet. And some of the female vote, they're still trying to analyze that. You know, the book's still out.
You know, Bruce, there's lots of discussions, and there'll be a lot of postmortems. But in the end, I said it on election night, and this isn't Mr. Insightful. A lot of people are talking about it. But inflation is devastating to the working class. It's devastating to the people in this country. And when you can't buy a home and someone, because interest rates are so high and the prices have gotten so high, and someone is telling you, hey, the economy's good. Or if you're looking to retire, but you can't because now your savings don't go far enough, and they say, hey, the economy's good. When you go to the grocery store and you actually look at the bill and go back and put something back so you can get out of the store because you can't afford it, that's real. And inflation at 20% over the last 4 years was devastating to much of this country. And being told that the economy is good isn't as much consolation as some people might think. And so a big part of this election, not the only part, but a big part was plain old economics and inflation. And they look back on the Trump years, and those were chaotic years, unpredictable years, but they view it as a time of economic prosperity that was better for them. Lower inflation. They didn't have the problem at the border. Less disruption internationally. And so I think Trump's argument of are you better off 4 years ago than now, he kind of won on that argument. And the memory of his term, maybe it's better than the reality, but the memory of that term is far better than today. So certainly in the post-mortem, one of the things that has to be taken account is something very straightforward, and that is inflation and the impact on people's lives. And they wanted a change. And when they looked at Kamala Harris, who for her it was a real challenge being so tied to Joe Biden. If they had had an open primary, a longer primary, and a Josh Shapiro or somebody else very formidable who wasn't tied to those policies, maybe they would have been more formidable. But for Kamala Harris, it was very difficult to get away from some policies that were very unpopular with so much of the American people. So Donald Trump benefited enormously from that. And he said, how I'm going to move forward on immigration and on energy and on the economy. That's a winning formula.
You're right. People go, well, inflation's down to 2.5%. That 2.5%, like, to your point, it doesn't resonate with people. They're like, where? You know, there was a report that came out about a month ago. A typical family of four who is making $150,000 a year is still living paycheck to paycheck. I mean, try and digest that. That sounds unfathomable.
It does, but if you take a look at housing, and by the way, that 2.5% is on top of the previous inflation. Right. It's cumulative. So people feel it. Yeah. They really do feel it. Now, if you're doing well, it may be inconvenient. okay, but you can handle it if you're wealthy. Or if you're having some assistance at the other end. But if you're in that broad group in the middle, it really, and it's a permanent loss, it hurts. Yeah. And it's a permanent loss of wealth. Now the challenge is, the real challenge as we move forward, is what are we going to do about it? The one piece where Donald Trump may have an opportunity is on energy policy, if he's successful in energy, because that can have an effect on prices. The challenge there, though, however, is the environmental concerns. There's no easy path forward. Donald Trump's team has talked about cuts in spending, especially with the federal bureaucracy. They've talked about energy policy. But that's offset by some other policies. Tariffs, for example, potentially could be inflationary, depending on the extent of those tariffs. We're going to have to wait and see. But for Donald Trump, for now, he's getting the benefit of the doubt, and for now, people want something better. Delivering on that is going to be, to put it mildly, it's going to be very hard for Donald Trump to deliver on that.
This is not a jigsaw puzzle where every piece fits in neatly. You know, it's more of a chess game, and you got to kind of figure out strategically where things are going to go. There are worries that Trump will test the limits of his presidential power, concerns about claims he's made publicly. He has said he wants the authority to fire civil servants. He views as disloyal. He vowed to use federal law enforcement agencies to investigate or prosecute perceived enemies, political rivals. Trump talk, real concern.
Bruce, you know, I mentioned earlier that campaigning is one thing and governing is another. Remember in 2016 when Donald Trump was talking about lock her up and Hillary Clinton and put her in jail, and even in the debate he said he'd put her in jail. And then once he got into office, he said, you know, she's been through enough. I think he made the right call there. And I don't know what the future holds on this score. I think for Donald Trump, he said to others that success is the best revenge. Winning is the best revenge. I hope he feels that way. Where there needs to be an investigation, there should be an investigation. But this notion of going after your political enemies, I'm certainly hoping that's not going to be the case. But if prelude is a little bit of an indicator of the future, in the past he has said a lot of things on the campaign trail that when it came to governing, he didn't do it. So we're just going to have to wait and see which Donald Trump this is. Certainly, he feels very strongly about what he's been through in recent years, the 4 indictments, the civil cases. I mean, he has been through quite a bit, and he has strong feelings about that. So we're going to have to wait and see. I'm hopeful that he'll abide by his notion that winning was the best way to address that and go forward in a constructive way, I hope.
Let me ask you about 2 people who seem to have unfettered access to him. Elon Musk, big campaign donor, on a phone call to Zelensky about Ukraine. Do you worry about his influence on Donald Trump?
I have to wait and see. It's clear that Elon Musk played an enormous role in the president's election. Financially, he did, of course, but he also did otherwise on X. He is the richest man in the world. He's smart. We are all commenting on election night, the landing of the space. It was just amazing, some of the things he's done. One of the goals is he wants to surround himself with some very smart and talented people. I'd certainly put Elon Musk in that category. So I'm not sure what formal or informal role he's going to be playing in the future, but for now he's by his side and he's somebody he trusts and looks to. So we'll have to wait and see. And Susie Wiles, of course, will be shaping a lot of the agendas and the conversations, but that is one access that I think will be pretty unfettered.
He also wants to blow up government as we know it.
And we'll have to see what that looks like.
Whatever that means.
We'll have to see what that looks like. It's one thing to want to reshape things or to restructure things. It's another when you roll up your sleeves and you can make some progress, but it's a hard thing to do.
All right, then there's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., name bandied about as HHS Secretary. There are some people who worry about his rather extreme views about health care.
That's another one that he has the president's ear. His endorsement meant a lot to the president. This is another one where campaigning is one thing and governing is another. I expect that he'll have a role. I don't know if it'll be as prominent a role as some people are expecting. That's another one I put in the let's wait and see category.
All right, and we will leave it at that. Rick, always a pleasure. Always fascinating. I know that you're going to be on the news tonight talking about some of the appointments that have been made and the impact on Florida. Always enjoy talking to you. You've got some fascinating insights. I always learn something when we chat.
Thank you, Bruce.
So I appreciate you. You can watch this edition of Path to the Polls, Encore Performance tonight at 7. I always appreciate hearing from you. Some of you don't always agree to disagree politely, but then that's okay. We all have our views, and I appreciate your views. So if you want to email me, please do. You can always watch on demand anytime on news4jax.com or the News4Jax YouTube channel. Have a great day.
See why every day more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.